Hello and welcome to the Indie Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Jim Azevedo. Hey, Jim, how are you doing?
Hey, Maddie, doing great. Thanks for having me here.
I am pleased to have you here. To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Jim Azevedo is the corporate communications manager at Drafted Digital. And prior to Drafted Digital, he was the marketing director at Smashwords. And I invited Jim onto the podcast because I was looking through the Drafted Digital wonderful blog
Mhm.
library. And I found an article that Jim had written called 10 Tips for Attending an Indie Conference. That was an article that was originally published in IBPA, which is the Independent Book Publishers Association, and then was repurposed with IBPA approval on the Drafted Digital blog. And I kind of feel like we're coming into conference season. So I thought this would be a timely topic. And so I always like to start out these kinds of conversations when someone has studied a topic carefully, as you have with these tips. What was it that you were seeing going on that led you to think it might be a good idea to give people some tips on what
My own mistakes, actually. I figured if I go to conferences and I'm not quite put together, it's that maybe others who are just kind of getting rolling with their conference experience, maybe they can learn from my experience of what to do and maybe what not to do when it comes to conference attendance, especially if it's, like, say, your first time going to a big writers conference.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to sort of read through this list that Jim assembled, and we're going to have some conversations about the do's and maybe some don'ts too, because sometimes the don'ts are fun. So one of the tips that you suggest for people who are an attendee is download the conference schedule as soon as it's available and highlight the sessions you want to attend.
Yes.
Why is that important? Not just like show up and see what's going on.
Yeah, because if you come to a conference and let's say you want to prepare for the unexpected, things will happen and invariably. It could be, especially if you're traveling a distance to get to a conference, things could happen like the airline might lose your luggage. I mean, you have to wait to get your bags back so you can get dressed to go to the conference. But more often than not, at least in my experience, when I get down the elevator, and sometimes the elevators can be packed when let's say you want to go to that first session, that first keynote session, and let's say it starts at 9 a.m. and you think, well, I'm going to head down from my hotel room at 8:45, no problem. I'll get there. But you get to your elevator, and then the elevator is just jammed from all the other attendees thinking the same thing. And then you just kind of sitting there like, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss this thing. And then let's say you get down to the floor where the room is, it's jam packed, and you don't know where the actual hall or room is where that session is being held. Then the stress level starts to pick up. So I highly recommend you get that schedule early. Start highlighting the sessions that are not missed sessions, workshops, keynotes, all those things that you really, really want to see. Highlight those so that you have an idea of all the sessions that you want to attend, like the ones that you know that you're not going to miss. The worst thing that you can do is just kind of show up and just plan to wing it because invariably things, I can almost guarantee you, things will change. Hotels are all organized differently. Sometimes they're scattered. Sometimes all the rooms for each session are really close together. And sometimes it is a hike to go from one session to the other. So do yourself a favor, download that schedule ahead of time and just kind of map out where you think you want to be beforehand.
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea also to select more than one. Like a lot of these conferences have different tracks. There might be 4 tracks of sessions at the same time,
Yep.
and you might pick the one that you really want, and then it's full or it's just uncomfortable. Like you might be able to get in the room, but it's uncomfortably full. So
Sure.
to have a backup too would be another suggestion I would throw out.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that. If there are multiple sessions and you want to attend more than one that happen to be at the same time, just prioritize them 1, 2, and 3. And then if you can't get into the first session that you want, or if there are 2 sessions that you really want to hit, sometimes there are audio recordings, sometimes there are video recordings for those presentations that you can get your hands on later.
Yeah, and there's another theme that I think I'm going to be coming back to a lot, which is that we're talking generally about in-person conferences. Like some of these pieces of advice would apply even if it's a virtual conference, but I think most of them are focused on actually attending a conference in person. And I
Mhm.
think that a key benefit of that kind of experience is not only the topics, but the people. So I know when I get that roster of sessions and it shows like if they're panel discussions, who's on the panel or who's giving
Mhm.
the presentation, that I'll pay as much attention to the names of the presenters or the panelists as I will the topic, because there might be an author that I really want to speak with or at least get to know better. And even if they're presenting on a topic that maybe wouldn't be my first choice, I still
Mhm.
might prioritize that session because of the personal contact as well as the content of the
Oh,
session.
sure. Yeah, I do that all the time. I've been to a conference and I've seen a speaker speak on a topic that's a little bit outside my area, but still have some interest to it. But this person is just a phenomenal speaker. Then I'll make it a point to go to that person's session because I know that I will always learn something.
Yeah. And conferences provide a great pool of possible guests for the podcast. So depending on what your goals are, you can
That is
prioritize
true.
who you want to talk to that way.
Yeah,
Another one that is interesting is download the conference app. Can you describe what that is maybe for people who don't have experience with that kind of app?
sure. So some of the larger conferences now, and even some of the mid-sized and smaller conferences will have an app that you can download prior to the conference. And I have to admit, Maddie, like the first time I heard about this, I thought, oh no, that's just one more thing I'm going to have to download and then learn how to use. And it's probably not going to be that good. And, whine. But these conference apps are super, super helpful. So just like a paper program that you'll get at the conference, well, it's like having a paper program that you would normally get when you register or when you check in at the conference. But you can do this ahead of time by downloading one of these apps. And again, you can see what this conference schedule is going to be. You can see who the speakers are, what their bios are. Sometimes you can see the presentation slides ahead of time and any handouts that these speakers might have. A lot of these apps even have maps. So if you want to attend a certain session, you can click on that. It will sync to your calendar in your phone or mobile device. So you'll get your reminders. I think one of the really neat things for those of us who are introverts when it comes to these conference apps is that a lot of them have a social media aspect to them. So when you first sign onto the app, they might ask you some icebreaker questions like, "Oh, where are you from?" or "What's your favorite ice cream?" or just little goofy things to help kind of break that ice. And there are discussions that go on, and there might be a particular thread about first-time attendees at this conference. The neat thing about that is the community will welcome you with open arms, and so it's like you already know a few people, a handful of people, sometimes a dozen people before you even show up. And then people will say, "Hey, let's meet at the banquet hall at such and such a time, or let's meet at the bar or at Starbucks." And it's just a really neat and easy way to kind of ingrain yourself with the community there. So I would highly recommend if your conference offers a conference app, download it and just start playing with it.
Yeah, I think that those, like the social aspects, are really important because I have a hard time, even if I put questions out on my Facebook account or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, it's kind of hard to get people to say, oh, yeah, I'm going to the conference. And
Mhm.
even if you're posting on a site that the conference or the organizer, it's a site that belongs to them, sometimes it's hard to get that kind of interaction, but much easier on the app. And
I
another tip
agree.
I would think now that I've mentioned the idea of the organizer or the event's social media presence is also be sure that if they have a hashtag associated with it,
Yes.
because I'll use ThrillerFest as an example. I went to ThrillerFest for several years and I could never remember whether it was like ThrillerFest 2020 or if it was like ThrillerFest 17. Like, I think it was the second one. I always expected it to be the year. So there was this period of time when I
Yeah.
was using the wrong hashtag and then I realized that they were using the number of the conference instead. So if you find out what that is, then you can use that to search social media as well. And sometimes you can't find that kind of social media interaction that you're talking about with the app that way.
That's an excellent point. And to your point too, Maddie, when you mentioned earlier about following some of the presenters that were going to be there, I think the same thing holds true. If you follow them on Twitter, why not tag them and say, "Hey, I'm looking forward to seeing you and being attendee in your session and your workshop coming up
Yeah.
at Thriller Fest or whichever the conference is," because then folks start to recognize your name too.
Yeah. And any of those relationships you can start building ahead of time, I think makes it even easier when you get there, then you don't feel all alone.
So true. So true. I have a little rule that I kind of made up on my own. When you hear, well, for those of us who are introverts, again, I don't want to assume that everybody is, but for me, sometimes when I hear the word, well, there's going to be a networking event at the conference, and all I can picture is walking into a banquet hall, not knowing a soul, and then having those flashbacks to junior high school where standing against the wall, and you're just scared to death.
Yeah.
So I made up this little rule for myself, and it's gotten so much easier over time. And the rule is just go in for one drink, and that doesn't mean it has to be an alcoholic drink. It means it could be a bottle of water or a coffee. And the one drink rule is just go in, grab that bottle of water, and just give yourself the amount of time it takes to finish that bottle of water until you meet somebody or you get invited into a group. And I can almost guarantee you that somebody's going to pull you in or somebody's going to come up to you and introduce themselves and kind of break that ice for you.
Yeah. I think anything you can do that makes starting the conversation easier, because I found that it's almost no problem to keep a conversation going. Like if all else fails, say to the other writer, "So, what are you working on?" And you
Yeah,
pretty much don't have to worry about saying anything for the next 45 minutes. But starting the conversation is tricky. And I think the conference organizers recognize that that's difficult for introverts and extroverts
sure.
alike. And sometimes they'll offer things like, I remember going to a conference where they had the little ribbons that they would attach, you could attach to your name tag that would
Hmm.
say like first time attendee or international visitor or things like that.
Right.
And on the surface, it seemed a little goofy, but they were great conversation starters because I started a bunch of conversations by saying, "Oh, like I see you're an international visitor. Where are you from?"
Mm.
So, yeah, anything that the conference offers to help make you part of that community, I definitely agree you should take advantage of, and I like the one drink rule of you have to give it at least that long.
Yeah, I just give it a try. A
Yeah,
lot of those conferences too, on the badges themselves, they'll have your name, title, and sometimes just the genre in which you write right there
yeah.
on the badge, which kind of pulls people in and say, and so that they can introduce themselves to you and say, "Oh, you write paranormal. I write paranormal too," and then you're off to the races at that point.
Yeah, and that's great not only just to have somebody to chat with, but, you can actually come up with some good business relationships by heeding those kinds of commonalities.
Oh, for sure. Hmm.
So, here's one that we had kind of referenced earlier, but I think it bears repeating is walk the show venue before the conference starts.
Yes. Yes, and learned this the hard way. Sometimes I've gone to probably dozens and dozens of conferences over the years from Smashwords and now with a draft to digital. And sometimes just based on circumstances, like you're traveling across the country, you arrive for me, I'm in California and I arrive in New York at like 10 PM, everything's shut down. I have to wait until the morning to get to the conference venue. If you know ahead of time, if you have the opportunity to walk the show floor ahead of time, 100% take advantage of that because again, sometimes it is so hard to find the room that you want to go to. Sometimes the workshop that you really want to attend or that you really need to attend is for whatever reason, it's in the furthest back corner away from you, and it's just not easy to get there. Sometimes, depending on the conference, there won't be any signage directing attendees where they need to go, or it's difficult to find conference staff to help you decide where to go. So save yourself some anxiety and get to the conference early if you can, or even the day before, and just walk around. Just familiarize yourself with the layout. That'll save you a ton of stress.
Yeah. I know there have been plenty of conferences where I've left that furthermost conference room, and the next
Mhm.
session I want to attend is in the same conference room, but the only restroom I know about is off the lobby 3
Yes.
miles away. And then it's always like on day 3 of the conference where someone says, "There's one right around the corner," right? I'm like, "Ugh."
Yes.
It's good to get steps, but sometimes you don't wanna be getting steps when you could be having a nice conversation with someone instead.
So very true. And good point. Maybe one thing that's worth mentioning too, Maddie, I don't know why this just came up in my head, but it wasn't in the article, is I consider not necessarily dressing in layers, but if you have a small bag with you, it's a good idea to pack a sweater or a light jacket because in summer especially, it's going to sound strange, but in summer especially, those conference rooms can be freezing cold. So
Yeah,
plan for that.
yeah, that's great advice. Um, so take copious notes. That's the next piece of advice you have. Why do you recommend take copious notes?
Because you are there to learn. And whether you like it or not, you're going to learn a ton. You're going to have information coming at you from a fire hose. And if you feel yourself at the end of day one where your head is just swimming or you have a headache, that's good because you're taking in all this information from all the different workshops, from all the different people who you were meeting. You will forget some of this information that is coming at you. So take those copious notes. I think what you're going to find is that over time, I always tell attendees, like, don't worry so much about things that you might forget because the things that you really need to learn, they sort of have a way of bubbling up in your brain, say halfway through the next week, the week after the conference. because you'll hear the same things over and over a couple of times that you really, really need to learn, often from different speakers that will really start to sink in. But while you're in these sessions, take those notes. You want to try to avoid missing anything any of those standout messages that you need to hear as well. So take those notes. All of our phones have cameras on them. Snap some pictures of those slide decks as they're on the screens when the presenters are going through their sessions as well. Even me, I've got to be one of the worst texters in the world. But the last time I was at a conference, my laptop was in my room. I had my phone. I was doing my best to catch up and take notes with my thumbs, and I actually did better than I thought, Matty. Thank you very much. But with my terrible notes and my snapshot of the slide decks, it was super, super helpful. Interact in those workshop sessions too. When it comes to the Q&A sessions, write down those pressing questions that you might have and ask those presenters at the end of those sessions as well. And again, if there are concurrent sessions and one of them you can't go to, find the presenter, if you can, during the conference itself for the session that you couldn't attend, and ask them if they would be willing to share their presenter notes to you. 100%. All of us speakers, we love sharing notes. We want our attendees to learn. That's why we're there. And again, you can ask the conference directors too if all the sessions are recorded via audio and or video.
Yeah, I can imagine that, especially if you're at a session and you've written down the question you have, but perhaps there isn't time during the Q&A to get to that question. Before you go into the banquet hall for the cocktail party, just glance through your outstanding questions, because you might see the presenter there. And that would be a super perfect way to start a conversation with someone saying, oh, I had a question, I didn't get a chance to answer it, but I would love to ask you now.
Great point. In worst case scenario, if you don't get that question answered during the workshop, or even at one of the networking events, you can always contact those presenters afterwards and say, hey, I missed your session. I wasn't able to attend. Can you please answer this question that I had? And they will get to it.
Yeah, the embarrassing story I have to tell. So the piece of advice I have is, if you have your phone and you have internet connection and you see like your hero author or standing let's say not hero author, because you probably know this information, but a well-known author that you want to speak to, just spend like 30 seconds looking at the website, because I remember to an author, and I had read several of his books and I liked them a lot. They were all standalones, but he was better known for his series. I didn't even realize he wrote a series. And so I was talking to him like he only wrote standalones. And then later on, I looked him up and I was like, oh, that wasn't good. That wasn't a good impression.
Okay.
Just a quick break from the interview. Are you getting value from the podcast? Please consider supporting it and all the work I do at the Indie Author by becoming a patron. To pledge a monthly contribution, go to patreon.com/the Indie Author, or to make an occasional contribution, perhaps to indicate the value that a specific episode or resource provided to you on your creative voyage, scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. And now, back to the interview. So we've been kind of talking about this, but here's a very explicit opportunity to talk about the importance of being an active participant.
Yes. And that starts from that. Being an active participant starts before the conference even begins. So let's take a look back, or a jump back from when we were talking about the conference apps too. So being an active participant starts before the conference even begins. And what I mean by that is participate in conversations. And you could begin doing that via the conference apps by signing up or by downloading the conference app, interacting with the social component of the conference app. And that can just be a simple, hello, I'm really looking forward to attending this conference in such and such dates. I hope to meet a lot of you when I go. You can also look through the conference schedule, find out who the presenters are. And again, just send them a quick tweet. Can't wait to see you at such and such a conference. I'm really looking forward to your workshop. And as Matty recommended, using that hashtag for that conference too. Then other attendees will see that. They might tag you in their tweets as well. So it's this community coming together. And then at the conference itself, once you're in the workshops, if you really enjoyed a certain workshop and you feel that it was of value for you in particular, why not tweet about it? And again, tag the conference presenter, tell them how much you enjoyed that session. Because presenters, they work really, really hard. I mean, this is all stuff that they're doing kind of extracurricularly to their day-to-day activities. It takes a lot of time. So when you let one of them know that you really appreciated their time and their expertise at these workshops, they all read those. They notice that. So that's just another way you can interact. And then try to interact with your fellow conference attendees as well. You would be amazed at how much you're going to learn from your fellow authors who are maybe just attending their first workshop as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tack on to the be an active participant that I'm always sort of shocked at how many people I see on their phones when they're sitting in a presentation. And I'm going to keep a happy thought that some of them are taking notes on their phone, or perhaps they've just taken a picture of the presenters and they're in the process of posting it on social media and saying,
Yeah.
I'm in this great presentation with Jim about attending a conference or whatever. But I'm thinking some of them are just scrolling through their social media. And if you're taking the time and spending the money to get to a conference, then be at the conference. Mentally
Yeah.
and physically.
I used to think maybe 10 years ago, if somebody was on their phone, like, how rude. How, come on, be here. But I think at these conferences, there are a lot of people who are taking a ton of notes and they're posting to Twitter about what they're learning
Yep,
for their friends who couldn't be there. So letting them know what's going on.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
The next tip you have if you're attending is bring business cards. So why do you
Oh,
recommend that?
yes. Yeah. You will meet people. You will meet a lot of people if it's a great conference. Even if you don't have business cards, this is not something that's going to break the bank. A simple website like Vistaprint, you can get 500 cards now. I think for gosh, I don't want to misquote this. I want to say less
For
than
not very
$30
much.
now. Yeah, for not very much. It's a good idea to have business cards or just something that you can give folks who may be able to help you. You never know who that person's going to be. It can be another author, because when you go through your author career, you're going to meet tons of people who can open doors for you. These could be your fellow authors. They can be editors that you meet, agents that you can meet, traditional publishers, independent publishers, booksellers. And the list goes on and on and on. And really, and you will meet these people at the conferences. So have a way, have something that you can give to them, a business card, where they can look up your contact information and send you a quick note or give you a call. And just a simple, plain business card is probably best. You want to avoid the glossy finishes. And the reason for that is when people go to write on them, they won't be able to, or it'll get smeared off.
Yeah.
You also want to avoid an oversized business card or a really tiny business card. The reason is people can't fit the big ones in their wallets where their normal business cards go, and the small ones just get lost in the shuffle. So when it comes to business card, maybe overly artsy isn't the way to go. I think kind of plain and simple is your best bet.
Yeah, I'm going to crib a tip from Michael Aron, who suggests putting your picture on it, which I think makes great sense. And unfortunately, I heard that tip from him like one day after I just ordered 500 cards with no picture on it. But next
Of
time I get
course.
them done, I am going to put my picture on it, which feels uncomfortable. But I realized when I get back from conferences, and I always try to make the little note on there,
Mhm.
exactly like you're saying. I love it when it's not the glossy, smeary kind, that I would think if I just could see a picture of who this person is, I would remember what our interaction was. And I was also
True.
thinking that people who are maybe going to their first conference, maybe they don't have a book out yet.
Mhm.
But even if you just have a picture with basically your name, your contact information, like your email, Michael even puts his phone number on there, which I think is very brave, but he says he's never had problems, and your picture, and then maybe
Mhm.
something that indicates, like if you're working on a mystery or you're working on a cozy, something that would
Right.
indicate that, but without providing some information. But if you don't have a lot of other professional information put on there, I think that's perfectly fine. But still having those to remind people about the interactions they've had with you.
Sure. Everybody starts somewhere, and nobody's expecting you, especially if you're aspiring. If you're a debut novelist, for example, no one's expecting you to have all the stuff yet.
Yeah.
So just something real simple, as Maddie is suggesting, I think is fantastic advice. And if you're uncomfortable putting your photo on your business card, if you can have a small photo on your website, I think that's fine too. Instead of the business card, a lot of times I will just click on someone's website if I'm looking for their bio to learn more about them, and then if there's a picture there, then fantastic because that helps me. That helps to remind me of who you are.
Well, I guess another, I'm channeling Michael here now again,
Sure.
but putting a QR code could be a nice solution because if you don't have a book out yet and you want to send them somewhere and you've got 500 cards to hand out, you
Yep.
could put a QR code on your card. And then the card could be very plain, just like your name, your contact, basic contact information, and the QR code. But the QR code could lead them to, oh, now my first book is out. So when they go to that QR code website, then they're going to get the latest and greatest. That might be another alternative.
That's good advice too. Yeah, those are simple to use and simple to generate. You can go, I think you could just do a Google search on QR code generator to
Yep.
find those types of services.
Yeah. So those were the 6 pieces of advice you had for if you're an attendee. But there were also a couple that you had categorized as if you're an exhibitor or a speaker that I think actually can be useful for attendees as well. And I think one we've covered somewhat. This is promote your attendance on social media. You know, we've been talking a little bit about the importance of posting on social media, flagging people, things like that. Any other tips for attendees for social media use?
I I would just say what I've seen work really well for attendees is just creating some type of a meetup. Like, hey guys, I'm going to be at the Starbucks, the hotel Starbucks in the lobby at 10 a.m. If anybody wants to talk shop about this, like your particular genre, whether it's memoir or romance or paranormal or nonfiction or just whatever the case may be. I've seen that work really, really well.
I can see something like the coffee shop would be comfortable because I'd rather say I'll be in the coffee shop at 10. And even if I'm sitting in the coffee shop at 10 by myself and no one shows up, it's no big deal. Like
Yeah,
I'm
no one
usually
knows.
sitting in a coffee shop by myself anyway, as opposed to
Yeah,
the bar. Like I'll be at the bar at 6 and then that's could be awkward if you're just standing there.
yeah.
And the other thing you could do that would be fun would be to say, like, let's say you're going to a mystery conference. You could say, I'm
Mhm.
going to be the person wearing the fedora, or you're ready to get
There you
cozy.
go.
I'm going to be the person who's wearing the fascinator hat or something like that. I don't know, but something fun to get. I mean, that in itself would be a conversation starter.
Sure. At the San Francisco Writers Conference, there's a group of folks that, not me, but they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and they go on a walk and they take photos of the city. It's a neat little tour and it's a great opportunity to just interact with one another. And at the end of the conference, I think they do it every single day of the conference. It's a 3.5 or 4 day conference, and they're all buddies at the end
Yeah. Yeah. That's
because
a
they're
great
suffering through
idea.
the trauma of getting up at 5 o'clock in the
Yeah,
morning to be there at 6.
exactly. Another tip that I think would apply equally to exhibitors and speakers and attendees would be don't forget the people you meet. Anything you would like to add beyond what we've already talked about in that area?
Yeah. So if you're getting cards from folks and you've had an interaction with them at the conference, and they gave you a card and you've had some kind of a connection with them, then just take a couple of minutes after the conference and follow up with those folks. It could be as simple as, hey, it was really nice to meet you. I hope the conference worked out well for you. Let's keep in touch. Or just something simple like that. It was great to meet you.
Yeah. And then the last one is schedule important meetings before the conference starts. Why do you recommend that?
Yes. Because a lot of times, especially at the bigger conferences, meeting schedules are filled sometimes weeks before the event actually occurs. So depending on the size of the conference, if you have an opportunity to schedule a meeting that's going to happen at the conference, but
Got
if you
it.
have an
Got it.
opportunity to schedule that meeting before, then try to do that. Try to do that. And again, this is based on my experience of not being able to get meetings that I wanted to. And a lot of times in my case, it was with the press or with a partner whose schedule was just filled like 2 weeks before the conference even began. There was just no time. So if you have if there are press who are going, or if there's an important editor or publisher who you want to meet, those meetings can be tough. And sometimes that contact information is available through like an app, a conference app. Those conference apps are usually downloadable weeks before the conference ever begins. So if you really want a meeting with somebody in particular, then again, use those conference apps, reach out to that person, ask them if they have availability at the conference. You'd love to get whatever it is, 10, 15, 30 minutes of their time to talk shop. I would highly recommend that you do that prior to the conference.
Yeah, I think that suggests a tip I would offer that's maybe the very, very first thing people should do, which is to think through why they want to go to the conference.
Hmm.
So I know that when I first started attending conferences that were related to my suspense, mystery, thriller kind of genre, I was really there because I looked through the list of talks. There was information that I wanted to glean from the experts in
Yeah.
those topics. I didn't have the podcast to invite them to yet. So it was a learning experience. And so I wanted to do everything I could to get to as many sessions as possible.
Yeah.
But I found that as time has gone on, my focus has shifted from the strict learning opportunity to the networking opportunity. And so there are times when I might be perfectly willing to miss every session on a particular morning of the conference because what
Yeah.
I really want to do is chat with all the people who are hanging out in the coffee shop or
Mm-hmm.
set up those meetings in advance during that time. And so how you spend your time at the conference should be informed by what you want to get out of it. Are there other tips along those lines you would have about different approaches people should take depending on what they hope to get out of the conference?
I think what you said, Maddie, is perfect. If you go into it thinking like, what do I need to get out of this conference? Why am I going in the first place? Why do I think it would benefit my career? If you have that in the back of your mind, then your path will lead you forward from there. You might be amazed. I had a similar situation to you, Maddie, where I remember, I think it was one of the RWA conferences where after all the sessions were over, just kind of walking by the bar on my way to my room and someone calling out, "Hey, Jim." And the next thing you know, you're in the bar for 2 hours talking about all the different things that you've learned, what they've learned, what you all, what really resonated with folks. And sometimes you'll just see these trends that are bubbling up that might not have even hit the industry yet. And the next thing, a week or a month afterwards, it's just like everybody knows about this thing, but you were on the first line there learning about it at this particular conference. It's amazing how much you can learn just by networking at these events. I think some of the best conversations happen when everyone's just finally kind of decompressing after whether it's coffee or the bar or on a walk.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. So great. Well, Jim, thank you so much for sharing your tips about attendance at conferences. Now everybody's going to be all well armed for any conferences they're going to be going to this summer and fall.
Oh, it's
Um,
my pleasure, Maddie. Thank you.
yeah, please let people know where they can go to find out more about you and imagine Draft to Digital online.
Yeah, just go to draft. That's DRAFT, the numeral 2, digital.com. You can find me there. You can email me anytime you like if you have additional questions about this or any topic. It's Jim, Jim, dot Azevedo. That's AZEV as in Victor, EDO at draft2digital.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you, Maddie. Thanks, everybody.